Hi, this is Stacy Bailey, and this is an overview of some testing that we did to look at various testing platforms and their potential applicability within education services. We've got several issues that we deal with on a fairly regular basis. We teach a lot of instructor-led courses as well as virtual courses. With the student to instructor ratio, it's very difficult for instructors to keep pace with the course while still being able to validate that students are getting their labs done accurately and on time. So it's very difficult. We don't have any real way to monitor how well students are doing on the labs. And instructors really don't have a good way to know when students are being quiet because they're falling behind or quiet because they've gotten it and they're ready to move on. Students can also get frustrated. In our labs that we build for our courses, we often have dependencies. So one lab has to be completed successfully to be able to build upon that for the next lab. Uh, if students make an error in a lab, there's no real way to catch that, and they can kind of keep going through the class for multiple later labs before they discover that error that they made in a dependent lab. That could really increase the frustration level. For curriculum developers also, it's very time consuming for us to run labs over and over and make sure that they are still valid after we do upgrades, new master images and patches, etc. And finally, for fulfiller training, they have no way of knowing whether or not the customers complete the labs that they deliver as part of the fulfillment training. So we've looked at several options in the tool. We have one very exciting one that was released with Istanbul. So it's just a version 1 product with automated testing framework. This is part of the core platform capability. So there are no new licenses that are required, no extra upcharge for all of our customers, and it's available to all of our customers except for Express. So on the plus side, core platform, it also has the ability to roll back test changes. So as it executes tests, if it creates test data, it will go back and clean that up. That's really, really nice. Low coding requirements as well. This is set up to be a point and click user interface, no code, unlike a lot of previous options that were available to us. The other thing that's really cool too is that if you execute a test that simulates user actions, it will also take screenshots at every step of the way. So you can accumulate a log showing every test that was executed over time and date stamped with visual evidence to validate that things did work properly at a particular point in time. Plus, it's still extensible, so it supports the Jasmine framework, and you can extend it with custom code. Now, this is a V1 functionality, so there are some things that we cannot do with it yet, but the kernel is there, and it is wonderful. It is also not integrated with PPM or Scrum. We'll talk about the testing application integrated with PPM and Scrum next. But in general, automated test framework would be best used for regression testing and, as we'll see, for lab validation within Ed Services classes. The next option that we've looked at is the test management plugin. This is for manual functional testing. This was a plugin that was introduced in the Helsinki version and is part of the IT Business Management Suite. So you do have to own PPM and Scrum to be able to have access to this functional test management application. Again here, it's very simple to learn, just like the automated test framework. It's also integrated with PPM, so that's nice for deployments, releases, and various projects. However, it is for manual test execution only, no automation with that. Users self-report whether or not things pass, and they don't necessarily have to generate evidence when they give that type of response. So there's no automation of screen captures. You just pretty much rely on the user's word. This is great for user acceptance testing or unit testing, but may not be something that can scale up and be automated. In the past, in education services also, we've used SPLE, or the self-learning portal, blah, 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 whatever that is. It's a robust, proven architecture developed by RAF. However, it does have a fairly steep learning curve, requires code for all the scoring and validation of exercises and tasks. So steep coding, uh, access to defined test scripts is severely limited. This isn't a tool that's owned by Ed Services anymore. So you have to kind of gain access, get permission, and coordinate. And from what I understand, there is a fairly long wait time before you start seeing some results there. Finally, we've also looked at Cerna CapIO application that was demoed to our environment. This is very similar to our automated test platform tool, except that there's also a test recording capability within the browser. That's pretty exciting. And very flexible, even like lower coding requirements than ours takes. However, uh, what that actually does is just generate the code that you then copy and paste into your test plan. It's also a third party, which may mean that there is cost. We're reliant on a partner for support. And given that we have a platform level capability that is largely overlapping with what they have, I don't know that this will have a very long lifespan. Also, our capability allows us to pass parameters from test step to test step. I didn't see that in here, and of course, no automated cleanup. So let's take a quick look at the automated test framework that I have incorporated into the domain separation class to try this out for the Istanbul release, and take a look at the integration that we have in place uh, that will allow instructors to monitor what students do. So here's the setup that I have. I have an instructor instance here, and he's looking at the instructor dashboard for the automated testing framework. I have student 1 and student 2. Now in domain separation, one of our first technical labs is to enable and use the domain picker. We're actually in two domain separated environments for that class. So essentially when we look at this, we will be showing the domain picker in the header and also enabling a new property. When I look at the tests in the automated test framework here as student 1, you can see that we have tests for each of the technical labs in the domain separation class. I can go to any one of these at any time. Now I haven't done the work that's required by this lab, but we can quickly take a look at what's involved in this test. Step 1, I impersonate system administrator. That's just a best practice thing to do to make sure that we're always executing tests with a predictable user. I'm doing a query here to see if in the user preference table, the domain picker is shown in the header. And I'm passing a parameter to make sure that it's set for the user that I impersonated in that first step. So you can see that if you can use the filter condition builder, you can definitely create one of these. And then the final check in here is to make sure that we have a sys property, where essentially to draft this test, we say what table and put in our conditions. So I'm looking for my property with a value of true and a type here. So that's the test that I'm doing. So as student 1, let me go and do this. So I'm going to show my domain picker in the header, and then I'll go to my sys properties and create my property. Okay, when we see our property, we put in the name. This is a true false. Our value will be true, and I'll submit. So that's the main gist of this one lab. At the end, when we go to our lab validation, we can go to our automated test framework as part of that exercise, go to 2.1 and hit run test. Clicking run test, They can execute the test plan and validate that all the key steps required in the lab have been done appropriately. The student can go to the result and see step by step which steps have passed and if there's a failure, which one failed. At the same time, we have a REST integration running on the test results table that reports the results to the instructor. So the instructor can see here, I accidentally clicked uh, 2.2 here, but we can see that one student has run the test for 2.1 and gotten a success. We can see who that is with the expanded view, and one student has run the test for 2.2 and gotten a failure message. Down at the bottom here, we can see if there are failure messages, the automated testing framework will indicate the step that was failed. That's important for instructors to know about so they can go back and reiterate points or reach out to students and help them figure out what the problems are. Over to student number 2, we can run the same test for lab 2.1. This student hasn't done any of the work yet, so this test will fail. Let's see what it looks like when we go to the results. Here we can see with the execution order 1, 2, and 3, this one failed because the domain picker is not shown in the header. The student then can go in here, show the domain picker in the header, and rerun the test. And now we've got our second error. Now that's a success, but we don't have the property enabled to use the new domain picker. So we can add that property in here. That's a true false with a value of true. And finally, on the third time we run the test, it should pass. Student gets a confirmation that everything looks good in there, and the instructor can actually follow along and see this student 2 ran the test 3 times. Twice was a failure, once was a success. We can kind of intuit that the failures came first, then the success came afterwards. And we can also see the error messages that the students encountered, as well as the number that have passed. We included the test passed in the lab results details because it's important to know if every student is failing or if it's just localized to a couple of students. So this is the dashboard that we have created. It's very simplistic. We do have tests that run either server-side or simulate user interactions with the system. But for all technical labs, we can have test plans that validate students have gotten them articulated properly. So we did use automated testing as part of our lab evaluations and proofreading and testing for domain separation Istanbul, and it really allowed us to dig below the steps in the lab and really uncover some misconceptions or some kind of somewhat wrong ideas in the lab. So it allowed us to get beyond the steps to the real learning behind the labs. I won't read this to you, but I will say just in conclusion that this has excellent benefits for our instructors to be able to truly understand how much of the education we're trying to convey is actually being received and understood by students. It will help us as curriculum developers to make sure that our labs are valid, retest them, etc. And it really helps students understand what they are doing in the labs and have a structured path for correcting anything that they have misunderstood or misconstrued with the labs so that they can really save on the frustration level later on down the road. So thank you. I hope that this has been helpful and insightful.